All right, thanks for being with us, guys. I'm filling in for Jim today, so I'll call this meeting of the Olympic Region Clean Air Agency to order, and we'll start as we do with quick introductions around. Why don't we start with board members online? Mike, you want to say hi?
Mike French, Clallam County Commissioner.
And Georgia?
Georgia Miller, Grays Harbor County Commissioner.
And Randy?
Randy Netherland, Mason County Commissioner. Hi, Georgia.
Hi.
And I'm Greg Brotherton, Jefferson County Commissioner and Vice Chair, and we'll turn it over to Emily in the room and then Jeff to introduce staff.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. I'm Emily Klaus, Thurston County Commissioner.
All right, and hopefully our owl will catch up at some point. All right, there we go. All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Johnston, ORCAA Executive Director, and I'm here joined in the room here by Jennifer DeMay, our Engineering Supervisor, sitting in for Mike Schultz, who is out on an inspection today. Odell Hadley, Senior Air Monitoring Specialist. Tyson Justice, Financial Services Manager. And for those who are wondering, Lynn is still with us through the end of April, but she is on vacation this week. So she'll be back.
Good for her.
Yep, so she'll be back next month for her last ORCAA board meeting. And Debbie Moody, Office Manager and Public Records Officer. Dan Nelson is upstairs running Zoom, ORCAA's Communications Manager. And Tiffany Flores, Record Specialist, and Rob Weiland, Inspection Supervisor, are also listening in.
Great, thanks. And I see Joan has joined us. You want to say hi, Joan?
Hi there. You want me to tell where I'm from?
Yes, please.
Today, tomorrow, let's see. I'm a council member from Tumwater.
Great. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. With that, we will open it up for public comment. Unless
Actually,
is there something
Greg,
else,
before, our legal counsel is here in the room.
Oh,
so,
approval. Oh, yeah, please. And then we should approve the
Dale
agenda.
hasn't caught up yet, so Jeff Myers from Law Lyman Legal Counsel, and my associate here is Jakob Kosters.
Good to see you guys. Sorry to jump over you. And I guess I jumped over approval of the agenda too. So are there any additions that need to be made to the agenda? All right, I'd welcome a motion to approve.
So
I
move.
make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All right. Georgia moved, Joan seconded. All in favor, indicate by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, we have an agenda. Now, if there are any public with us, this is the time for public comment. We'd love to hear from you. Is there anyone online, Dan?
Nobody online. Haven't heard any comments. Come in.
Okay, thank you. On to the consent agenda. We have two items on the consent agenda, the minutes from February 12th, as well as the expenditures and disbursements. Any comments or questions? Welcome a motion.
I'd make a motion to approve the meeting minutes from the February meeting.
I'll second.
Actually, it's for the entire consent agenda.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I make a motion to approve the entire consent agenda.
Second.
Okay, seconded by Emily in the room. All in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Hi.
Consent agenda passes. Everyone wants to get to the climate change talk like me, I can tell. All right. Well, with that, we are here. I think you can give this one every couple years and it's going to get just grimmer and grimmer, but we're passing this off to Odell.
Okay, Dan, could you pull up the slides? So hopefully this will work, but I actually want to start by saying I don't want this to be grim. This is supposed to be science and hopefully more practical. And Dan, could you try and get it to the presentation mode rather than the speaker prep mode? Not sure which screen.
It's so challenging to get the right one presented. I run into that all the time. You're never quite sure what everyone else can see. No.
And actually, while we're waiting for that to come up, if I could say just a couple of words. Odell and I were talking about a month ago, and Odell said, hey, I gave this presentation at a board meeting, must have been more than about 4 years ago, because it was before I came, that it was well received, and so thought, well, maybe it was time to kind of give another climate change presentation. We had a light agenda this month, so it seemed like a good time. And also, whenever I get asked, well, what are the biggest challenges to air quality in our region, I usually, so climate change is always something about what I say, and because of the things that Odell's going to talk about is definitely taking us backwards and making our air quality more and more challenging. And so that's a clear link between the air quality work that ORCAA does and climate change, which impacts us all in a lot of ways, air quality and other. So anyway, so.
So the first slide, Dan, or next slide. So just want to start with a changing climate for us means more wildfires and wildfire smoke incursion. Probably more flooding and landslides, more extreme heat waves and colder cold snaps in the Pacific Northwest. And that might seem counterintuitive, but we'll talk about the science of why that's going to be. But basically what it means is we just get more of whatever we've already got in extremes will potentially happen more frequently. In addition to, yeah, just different, okay, let me get my thoughts again. So, and these changing climate conditions can both improve and degrade air quality depending on what's going on. You get more rainstorms that can help keep the air cleaner. You get more cold snaps that can actually cause, or these inversions that last for a really long time that can cause the air quality to degrade. And then there's a whole host of other issues that we might have to deal with that are not related to climate change, and that has to do with like where specific crops can be grown, and so that might have to change. The changing climate can enable new diseases as animal migrations change, and you can have mosquitoes carrying what used to be tropical diseases coming up into our area, so we might start to see things that we haven't seen before, and need to prepare for that. And we can create conditions for more frequent natural disasters, but I mean, we know how to deal with those. We just need to be able to deal with them more frequently. And I think the main message I want to get from all this is, I know you said grim, but I think the main message here is if we understand how things are changing and how they are going to change, we can be proactive in our adaptation and not always reactive. And that's kind of my main message here today, is sort of this idea of adaptation and mitigation, and that we're not necessarily all doomed. It's just a change. So I'm going to first talk a little bit about the science of how atmospheric processes work. This is very, very, very basic. Obviously, the atmosphere is a complex system with a lot of different components interacting. So if you want more information on that, I'm happy to give that to you offline, but for now, we'll just stick with the basics. So let's just start with our planet and the sun. So next slide, Dan. So here's our planet. It's tilted. We have the sun hitting it. It hits it most extremely at the equatorial and tropical region, so that's where it sees the most direct sunlight. And as you go toward the poles, you get less and less and less sunlight, which means it gets colder and colder. And so what this sets up is a difference. You have hot, warm air at the equatorial and tropical regions and very cold air at the poles. And hot air, you can equate that with a higher pressure system, and cold air, we equate that with a lower pressure. And air always wants to move from high pressure to low pressure. So the air is going to try and move from the poles, or from the equator toward the poles. And it does that in a variety of ways. So next slide. But the basics are, we have the planet's rotating. So that's really critical. So at the equator, the planet is rotating at 994 miles per hour. That means that an air mass just sitting there is moving at 994 miles per hour. But that's a warm air mass that wants to move poleward. And so as it moves poleward, you can see that the rotation gets slower and slower as you move poleward, but the air mass is still rotating at its original speed, which means as it moves toward the north or toward the south, it's going to actually continue to have that that speed that it already had, and it's gonna angle and move from west to east, and so we're gonna have this west to east or easterly wind set up. And that's really critical, because if you move to the next slide, that's really what sets up our jet stream. And so the jet stream is also referred to as a thermal wind, and it's driven, the west-east component is driven by that temperature difference. So the hot, warm air or the hot, moist air at the equator, and then the very cold, dry air at the poles, that difference, the stronger that difference is, the faster the jet stream will move from the west to the east. And you can see in this picture that it follows that temperature gradient. So it kind of follows where the temperature changes, and it also sets up where that temperature changes. So it's kind of a positive feedback mechanism where it keeps the cold air in the north and it keeps the warm air in the south. It almost sets up like a barrier between and helps keep that temperature difference there. So because the planet tilt changes, the jet location changes from summer to winter, and it moves north in the summer and south in the winter. And so as it moves north, it brings more of those storms to the north, and it gives us a warmer, drier summer here. And then as the winter comes, it moves south, kind of sits over top of us, maybe a little bit of Oregon, and we get more rain and stormy systems in the winter time. So next slide. So we also have water vapor in the atmosphere, and water vapor is a great greenhouse gas, and we actually love the greenhouse effect. So the warm water at the equator is evaporating, and that warm air can hold a lot of water. So the warmer the air, the more water vapor it can hold. So without our greenhouse gases or our water vapor, the average Earth temperature would be minus 5.8 degrees Fahrenheit. Really, really cold, or also referred to as a snowball Earth. But because of water vapor and other greenhouse gases, our average temperature is about 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and we can all live here, and it's great. And oh, this map right here, the units, that's the total amount of water in the atmospheric column if it were all condensed, squeezed out, and measured. So if every bit of water vapor condensed and rain up and fell out as rain, that's how much water vapor is in the, so you can see the bar at the below. And you can see that the poles are really, really dry. There's almost no water vapor up there at all. It's so cold that it condenses and falls out as snow, and just can't really hold very much water up there. So that actually helps keep the poles colder too, because we don't have those greenhouse gases up there. Okay, so what that means is when we emit greenhouse gases, they have a much stronger effect at the poles. So Dan, if you can go to the next slide and play this little movie, if it worked. Play. So this is the changing temperature starting in about a little bit before 1900. And this is the change relative to the average temperature between 1951 and 1980. And as we go forward, you can see it kind of gets warmer and colder and warmer and colder, and you're going to start seeing more and more warm as we, hit the 80s. But what I really want you to see is where it's getting warmer. And where the strongest warm signal is showing up. So, and that's at the poles, which means it's much warmer at the poles than at the equatorial and tropical regions than it used to be. And so what that has effectively done, so click forward 2 slides, Dan, is it's changed that thermal gradient. So we have our strong jet stream, and we have a strong difference in temperature between the equator and the poles. And we have much more of a west to east component in our jet stream, and it moves a lot faster as well. When we reduce that temperature gradient, that component of the jet stream gets much weaker, and we actually have a much higher amplitude. And so the jet stream is able to carry warm air further into the northern regions. So that further warms up the Arctic, and it's a positive effect. But it also is able to carry colder air from the poles down toward, places like New Orleans and Florida. So then we end up with 9 inches of snow in New Orleans, which is weird. But, we have 9 inches of snow and it's okay. So that's just something we need to really start thinking about as our climate dynamic is changing, that we are carrying warmer air up into the poles, which is gonna start melting permafrost and sea ice, and we're seeing a lot of that now. And then it's also gonna be carrying some of that colder air down much further south. And when I say we're warming the poles, I just wanna be clear here. If the average temperature in the poles are, say, minus 35 degrees and we warm it by 8 degrees, we're still looking at minus 27 degrees. So that's still really cold air that we can bring down into the southern regions of our country. So that is kind of the basics there. And like you said, there's a lot of other dynamics at play that I didn't go over, but the main feature there is that our jet stream slows down and it carries, it sort of is better at mixing the temperature between the equator and the poles. What it also does is slow down the speed at which systems move through. So when you get a big, low, rainy system, it can kind of hang out longer because that east to west component or west to east component is not carrying it through as quickly. And then you can also get these high pressure systems, stagnant systems that hang out much longer than they used to because they're not being carried through as quickly. So now I'm going to move, before I move on, is there any questions on that part of it?
So many fundamental questions, but I'll just ask one because I find this fascinating, and I love the 10,000-foot view. So the whole atmosphere is spinning at that same speed, right? This is
Yes.
not really, yeah. So the wind, I always think so is the wind struggling against the inertia of the speed of the rotation, but it's the whole atmosphere that is spinning equally. And does it spin slower as you get higher into the atmosphere, trailing the down?
Yeah, so there is a 3-dimensional component to that I didn't get into. So as the equator, it's so warm and hot and there's so much water in the air, it actually rises, right? So you get a lot of rising, and as it rises, it cools and rains out. But as it rises, it also it slows it down, which forces it poleward as well. So then you get these big tropical systems that rise up in the equatorial regions, and they're very wet and they're very dynamic tropical storms. And then they move poleward. And as they move poleward, they cool off and that water rains out. And then by the time it hits about 30 degrees, it's a dry system. It actually subsides back down. And this is just really cool to me. But if you look at the globe, you'll notice that most of our deserts sit at about 30 degrees north.
And south, right?
And south. Well, there's not as much land mass to the south, but yes. So when you look at the bands of green and desert on our planet, they match up with those tropical systems and then the subsiding desert systems. So, yeah, that also plays a role.
Where the desert's going to move?
Huh?
Where the desert's going to move now with this new weaker jet stream?
Well, that's the thing. That component of it probably will still be in the same place, because that has more to do with the vertical lift and the warm at the equator. So that's a harder one to say, and I haven't really looked into it, but what I've read is that wherever you're at, it's just gonna be more. So if you're in a desert, it's just gonna be hotter, drier desert. If you're in a tropical rain system, it's gonna be wetter, more tropical, is the sense that I've been getting from the predictions. So whatever you're getting, just amplify it.
That's helpful. Cool. Thank you.
Sure.
Fascinating.
Any other questions? Okay, so now I'm gonna get into the effects that we are seeing and will see here in the Pacific Northwest in our communities. And so, the first, most obvious one, most obvious one is temperature. We have been seeing, I have noticed that our summers have gotten much warmer lately. Seeing a higher frequency of plus 90 degrees days in the summer the last several years. We had that heat dome in 2021. This is a photograph I took driving up to Chicopee, of the trees after that 2021 heat dome. And I noticed that all of these cedars were just crispy fried brown. But some other trees right next to them were fine. So, we just have to look at some trees that are native to our region are gonna be more heavily impacted than other trees by these heat waves. The hotter, drier summers are likely to dry out our soil, which could lead to more wildfires. The forests become a little bit more sensitive, and we could start seeing more wildfires, which are actually pretty rare here in a temperate rainforest. And then the temperature can also really strongly impact fish and wildlife. And I just, after that heat dome in June, I know that there was a lot of damage to the oyster and some of the fishing communities. We saw a lot of die off right away, just from the waters heating up so quickly. And so that's something else that we can start to expect, or at least need to prepare for. And then also in warmer waters, you know, our lakes, rivers, bugs and bacteria can grow a lot faster. And so there's something to be aware of, is that water contamination can become an issue. And so that's something to worry about. We can also start to see an increase in pests. So if the trees become stressed because of the dry soil, they become more susceptible, and we can start to see the bark beetle has really decimated some of the forests up in Canada, British Columbia to the north, and we haven't seen too much of it here, but I think we've seen a little, and so that's something else we need to kind of be thinking about, be aware of in the future, and thinking about what trees we plant. Just, you know, be aware of these things, and maybe pick trees to plant that aren't gonna be as susceptible to dry conditions or the bark beetle, et cetera, that kind of thing. The next, water is gonna become an issue. That our infrastructure is set up right now to rely on a significant snowpack. Thank you, Dan, for interpreting, because I keep forgetting to say next slide, so. And then changes to our snowpack can affect our stream flows, which we've already started to see in certain dry winters. We can also start to, so the models that I was looking at and some of the predictions did not show significant change in our annual precipitation. But what it did show is that we're gonna get less rain in the summer, more rain in the winter, more precipitation in the winter, and that more of it is gonna fall as rain and not snow. And that can be a problem, because if we're not storing it as snow, then it's just falling as rain. It's running down off the mountains, joining up with the rain that we've gotten here at lower levels and flooding our rivers, and causing more flooding, like our commissioner from Clallam County, was it Clallam County, is dealing with. I just read the article yesterday, the day before, that the road to the Hoh rainforest has been washed out due to flooding in December, and maybe Mike can.
Jefferson
update
County,
us on that.
technically.
And what? And Jefferson?
The Upper Hoh is in Jefferson County.
Okay,
There's a lot of
so
impacts
maybe you
coming.
can update us on that, but from what I read is that they're concerned that might be closed for the summer, and that would have tremendous impact on, I mean, I don't know how many visitors it gets every year, but a lot, and that brings the commerce and tourism to all of your communities, which are can take an economic hit. We can
Like
also be looking at.
500,000. And I just want to say again, you should watch the governor's press conference at 10 a.m. tomorrow.
Okay, we'll do that. We can also expect to see some sea level rise, which can impact infrastructure. And landslides become a much higher risk as well, from saturated ground. So moving through health, air quality is a big one. We know from wildfire smoke incursions, and we don't even need to have the wildfires in our region. They can be in British Columbia, they can be in California, they can be in Oregon, Eastern Washington, and we can still be inundated with some pretty heavy smoke. And so as those become more frequent, that's something we need to watch out for in the summer and prepare for. Disease migration, I already mentioned that, so we might start to see diseases that we hadn't seen before. In the last couple of years, we've actually had a few cases of malaria that were in Seattle that were contracted in Seattle. It wasn't that they got malaria in some tropical forest and brought it back. They actually got malaria from mosquitoes in Seattle. Another one, valley fever, is a fungal respiratory disease that you get from contaminated soil. So far, that has been mainly an issue in Arizona and Eastern California, but that could become a problem here in Eastern Washington. And if you've ever driven through Eastern Washington during what's called a haboob, it's insane. It's these dust storms that just come through, and when you get out of your car, it's like you're chewing on sand. So I know that we have airborne dust in our state, and that could be a big deal if it's carrying valley fever. West Nile virus, carried by birds. Changing migration patterns in birds can start to bring diseases. Obviously, we know that bird flu has been having a huge impact on our, the egg economy and our wild bird populations. And then heat stress, especially when heat events coincide with smoke incursions, that could be an issue too. So if people don't have clean air shelters or cool shelters to get to, that can be a problem. So the last one I have, Dan, is next slide, economy. So I took this photograph again during my last drive up to Chesapeake. This was due to both landslide and it's on the coast, so could be some coastal erosion going on as well. But the Highway 112 between Clallam Bay and Neah Bay is down to one lane. So that is the only road going into Neah Bay. And from this point, there isn't really a good option for a detour. We had a massive landslide a couple of years ago right outside of Clallam Bay, but luckily there was a detour where you could go up behind the correction center, and they were able to get that. It was like an old funky logging road, but they were able to resurface it quickly enough so that the community could get out and get supplies into the community. But that's just another thing that we need to be aware of, is that, certain areas, especially here on the peninsula, our roads are susceptible to landslides and flooding. And for a lot of our communities, they're the only way to get in and out and to get supplies in and out. So as these events happen and as they become more frequent, repairing that infrastructure becomes really expensive. The seafood industry can be impacted, which I know is a big economic source for a lot of our communities. Timber, as I mentioned, trees become more susceptible to pests and wildfires. And our available food, the food that we grow here may not grow so well here in the future, but also food that we rely on from other areas might become less available. And so I just want to end that with this next one, because you may have heard this on the news. Chocolate and coffee are becoming more expensive, and they're facing a lot of challenges from diseases and also just from climate change in different areas of the world. So, I mean, who knows? Maybe we'll be able to grow cocoa beans someday, have our own chocolate, but that one bothers me a lot. Don't want to lose access to coffee and chocolate. So
I can say from recent experience that Kona coffee and Kona chocolate are both thriving. I was on farms just yesterday or day before yesterday. So
all right, Hawaii go. So I just want to end this presentation with the last slide, which I'm hoping is going to be my hopeful slide. But human beings have thrived in a wide range of climates for thousands of years. And for most of that time, we have built our infrastructure on what we've experienced in the past. So if we know a river floods every year, if we know that this area is going to flood, we might build our homes on stilts, or, use snowmobiles to get around, because that's the best way to travel if you live up in the Arctic. The way that we build our homes is really determined by the climate that we live in. I love these earth ships outside of Taos in New Mexico, living in the desert. It's a awesome way to adapt to desert lifestyles. And here's our picture of Aberdeen down here in our tropical rainforest. So just a wide range. Temperate rainforest, I'm sorry, rainforest, anyway. So we human beings can thrive and live in a wide variety of climates. It's just that we need to know what that climate is gonna be, and we need to design our infrastructure in such a way that we can thrive there. We are so fortunate to live in a time that we have the technology and the ability to be able to forecast and predict what that climate is gonna look like. And so for the first time, we're actually able to think about the future of our climate while we're putting in infrastructure. So when you guys get the money to rebuild the Hoh Rainforest Road, think about the fact that it's probably gonna flood again, and it's probably gonna wash out again. So when you're designing the new road, plan for that. And so that would just be my main message to everybody, is that as we go forward, look at areas that are already prone to flooding and realize that the frequency of that is going to start getting to be more and more. I think I had it in my notes and I didn't mention it, but under the water, Dan, you don't need to go back, but I just need to go. For sea level rise, we had those king tides in Olympia, and I think elsewhere a couple years ago, that just flooded all of downtown. And that was considered to be a once in 100-year event. So a 6-inch rise in sea level turns the 100-year flood event into an 18-year flood event. Okay, 18 years, that's not too bad. A 12-inch rise in sea level leads to a 2-year event. And right now, we have measured about a 9-inch rise in sea level since the measurements began in 1900. So that puts us somewhere around a 10, 11, 12-year event. But those are the types of things that we should be aware of as we move forward in our communities, and you as decision makers for communities, just thinking about those things as you build infrastructure and as you change, and you already know what's susceptible to flooding. It happens, and so we can just plan for that. So that's kind of my, it's not all grim. Let's just be practical and try to get. And then the last message there is, does that mean we don't need to mitigate climate change? Well, that's not true either, because adapting to a moving target is really, really difficult. So if we can achieve a new sort of stability, or even just slow down the rate at which the climate changes, that's to our benefit, and we'll be able to adapt better. And then Dan has listed additional resources for all of you. We updated that PDF so that those links should now work for you. If you tried them before yesterday, they may not have worked, but they should work now. Okay, that's all I had. That went a little longer than I was expecting, so my apologies.
Excellent, though. Thank you, Odell. Any questions or comments on the optimistic and cheery presentation from Odell on climate change? I'll say, the things like the Upper Hoh Road and a lot of these challenged infrastructures are often kind of at the worst place they could possibly be, right by a very strong river in the Hoh. The mighty Hoh is going to go where it wants to, and often surrounded by wilderness areas and national parks. So it literally takes an act of Congress to make the changes for to future-proof those roads. So we're pushed again and again into reactive postures, and it's tough. But and one other thing I wanted to mention real quick is something that you didn't talk about in community impacts is, to go back to COVID, I thought that was something that hit all aspects of society the same, and it was the same. It hit different classes in a different way, and climate change is as well. And we, at least in Jefferson County, get an awful lot of climate refugees that impact other issues like our housing affordability is impacted by climate change in a very real way, as we are a mild area. So folks that live in areas that are already really hot or really cold and it's getting more of the same, it is becoming less livable as our land on the peninsula here becomes less livable slower than other areas. There's other real community impacts that are happening already, I think.
Thank you, Greg. That actually does remind me, one thing I forgot to mention is you're absolutely right. The Pacific Northwest, compared to a lot of other places on the planet, is fairly resilient to climate change. We are probably in one of the best locations. When you look around at the different communities that will be impacted. So that's good on one hand, but you're right. If that means we're seeing a lot more people move here for climate reasons, then that could be a problem.
California.
Great, thank you. Any other questions or comments before we move on?
I have one. I'll just real quick, I want to say thanks for the presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I just got back from DC. I was in DC last week and it is looking very grim up there, talking, to representatives on the Hill. It got to the point where I had to ask one of the staff people in one of my last meetings, like, hey, this is a random question, but like, what makes you feel the most hopeful right now? Like, is there one thing that like makes you feel hope? And he just turned red because he didn't have an answer. And I was like, okay, well that kind of sucks, but I totally get it. But one thing I learned while I was out there, when we were talking to our congressional representatives, they were like, you can't ask for funding for things like climate and environment anymore because it's not going to happen, at least not with this administration. So if you want to move forward a climate initiative, talk about how it connects to the economy, because that's where you're going to get somewhere with the people who are here currently. And so I made a note when you mentioned the impact on the economy, because that's not an effect that people really think of. But it's true and it's real. And the more we can talk about climate issues by focusing on issues that people in office currently might care more about, the farther we can maybe make our dollars go. So,
Yes.
yeah.
Thank you for adding that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thank you for that, Emily. Any last thoughts before we move on to the 26 budget? Something we can change, right? Something we can affect at least.
Yeah,
All right,
I'll just say I think that you hit the nail on the head towards the end when you talked about the need for planning. We live in the Pacific Northwest. Humans have always developed on coastlines. Humans have always lived near rivers. We're not going to be able to just never be on a coastline or near a river again, but understanding what those systems do and how we can plan and mitigate those things, I think becomes really critical for us as policymakers. But, we live where we live, and that this is where the resources are. This is where, the transportation vectors are. So, I do have some optimism. I'm glad that this wasn't just a doom and gloom presentation, but I will also say I feel like I learned a lot. And that's, I think, the advantage of having people that are really strong science backgrounds that help this agency. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Hadley. On to Dr. Johnston. Do you want to tee off the budget conversation?
Sure. Just put this on the agenda just to kind of tee up a couple things, because the timeline for finalizing our fiscal year 2026 budget in the coming months is a little different than usual because of the dates of how our board meetings fall. And so just wanted to mention that and then talk a little bit about kind of what Tyson and Lynn and I and the rest of the team are putting into our draft fiscal year 2026 budget that we will be bringing to the Finance Committee in April for a detailed discussion. So just wanted to mention that the budget will need to be pretty complete by the time we bring it in April, because our May meeting, when we would usually have more chance to work it and talk about it, is actually less than 30 days from our June meeting when we will finalize it. So we actually need to go out for public comment by May 9th. And then our May Finance Committee and May board meeting is on May 14th this year. So we'll be bringing a fairly complete budget to the finance committee in April, and then we'll talk about it in more detail at the full board meeting, just to give everyone kind of a sense for where this is going and what we're hoping to get passed. But again, based on RCW, we do need to have an approved budget by the end of June, because of course our fiscal year runs from July 1 through June 30th of every year. So, any questions about the timing of things and how things are going to march forward in the next few months before I just hit on a few highlights of what we're including in our draft budget? Okay. Not seeing anything. Again, the budget's going to be pretty similar to what you've seen before. There's really not much that's changing in terms of revenue and expenditures. Again, as you know, our agency salaries and benefits account for about 80%, or about 85% of our agency's expenses. So that's not changing. The only significant staffing change that we're proposing is we are planning on holding the financial specialist position vacant for the next fiscal year. Again, this is a position that was created during the last fiscal year, and it is currently vacant. But working with Tyson, again, our new financial services manager, we've talked about it, and his recommendation is to leave the position vacant while he gets up to speed on the position and all that the position does. And then he and I will have conversations going forward about whether or not we want to fill that position, perhaps in the fiscal year 2027 budget. But other things that we're planning in terms of what's included in our draft budget, again, as per board resolution 274 and 275, in terms of how we use the consumer price index, we are using a 2.3% CPI for our fee increase for our fee programs, as well as our per capita assessment. So again, that's 2.3%. And then we're also including that increase in staff salaries for next year, again, similar to what we've done in the past. In terms of using the CPI, that's actually lower than it's been for a number of years, because CPI, of course, has been much higher for the past 4 years than it is right now. We're also looking at looking at some of our fee programs over time. So next fiscal year, we'll be bringing proposals about further adjustments to our fee programs. But right now we're looking, for instance, at our land clearing burn fee program. And so we'll be talking with the finance committee in April about that. We've got a proposal to raise those fees more than the 2.3%. But again, that's a pretty small program relative to overall agency budget. Also just wanted to mention briefly kind of some of the uncertainty with what's going on with federal funding. Of course, so ORCAA, we do get what we call a core grant from the EPA. In our current fiscal year, that's just under $175,000. We also get what we call core funding from the state of about $134,000. We feel the state core grant is safe, while the state budget is certainly under stress, as everybody knows. In my conversations with Ecology and others, there aren't any cut exercises that look at reducing the money for our core funding from the state. But we really don't know what to assume in terms of federal funding. The current continuing resolution that was just passed by the U.S. House does include full funding for state and local air grants. But again, it's unclear, and so it's unclear what the Senate's going to do with that in the coming days. But as we know, as we've seen in the past couple months, just because Congress has appropriated something doesn't mean the administration will necessarily pass that funding through. And so again, we're just not sure what to expect. We're looking at, should we put a 50% reduction in our federal core grant? Not sure. Tyson and Lynn and I will continue watching this closely, and we'll see kind of where we are in the coming weeks, but we'll have a proposal for the Finance Committee in April to talk with you all about. And then the other big piece of federal funding is funding for Chesapeake, operating that, and we get about $90,000 a year. There are some important updates to Chesapeake, which Odell will provide during the monitoring update here in a few minutes. So that's what I had in terms of budget. Again, just wanted to give you just a heads up for what's coming in terms of timing with budget conversations in the next couple of months, and kind of what we're looking at for folding into our draft budget, which we'll present in April to the Finance Committee. Any questions or about any of that?
Thank you, Jeff, for the highlights. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Okay, I just said thanks for the highlights and the cadence of that process as we're going. And if there's no other questions, we'll just keep it with you and straight on to the executive director update. Sorry to stop you.
Okay. All right, great. So first thing, just wanted to mention, I think at our last meeting, we hadn't yet gone out with our request for proposal for our new agency database, but that did go out on March 3rd. And we've already had a fair amount of interest, and I think Dan's going to put the link to that in the chat. Yeah, that's very exciting. Again, the agency has been looking forward to a new database for a long time. And so to now be out for collecting proposals is great. The deadline to get proposals into us is April 7th. So we'll be looking at those carefully, probably scheduling some follow-up meetings, some demonstrations with some of the folks that submit proposals, and then look to have a contract sometime in May with their work beginning in June. So that's exciting. Also, just wanted to mention again, as follow-up to a presentation at the February meeting where we had the focus on Jefferson County. Just wanted to thank Greg for getting us scheduled on the agenda for the Jefferson County Board of Health meeting on February 20th. So Dan, Odell, and I attended the meeting in Port Townsend in person, and Mike joined us on Zoom, but I think we had a pretty productive conversation with the Jefferson County Board of Health. Great, looks like your hand's up.
It was, so I would remember my question, then I forgot my question, but still signaled that I had a question. So, sorry, what were you just talking about right before this? Sorry, I'm having a moment.
About the focus on Jefferson County.
Prior to that.
Prior to that was about the new agency database.
Oh yeah, just a comment on databases. Yeah, thank you. We've gone through them, and I would just put it into the process every time that we've, in a myriad of organizations, updated the database. That's a very long relationship. So just make sure that you have a company that you can get that follow-up work with through the often years that it takes to get everything unraveled for that new conversion. Yes, that's a good reminder, and a good chunk of our database team is here in the room with me, so all hearing that recommendation. So yes, we recognize this is a really important decision for the agency because it is a long-term relationship that we'll have with the successful bidder. So let's see. So talked about Jefferson County focus. So in April, we'll have a focus on Mason County. We're working on that. And Randy already has us scheduled and plugged in with the Mason County Board of Health at the end of May. So thank you, Randy. I'll mention that mostly for the Thurston County board members, but Matt Kennelly, the executive director of LOT Clean Water Alliance, has invited me to join the LOT board work session later this evening to talk about ORCAA and ORCAA's regulatory role with LOT. So I'm looking forward to that conversation with some of our colleagues here. Let's see. I'll mention that Mike, at the last board meeting, there was some interest in board members attending smoke school or attending opacity training, which is going on tomorrow. I don't think Mike heard from anybody, and just wanted you to know that that is something that we do every 6 months. And so in September, if there is interest in doing that, but perhaps tomorrow didn't work, or the weather is supposed to be kind of rainy tomorrow, maybe the September weather would be nicer, but just keep that in mind. If it is something that you're interested in joining and learning more about opacity reading and how ORCAA's inspectors do that, there's an opportunity to do that roughly every 6 months. And to finish up, just a couple legislative things. Probably aware that today is important cutoff. Bills have to move out of House of Origin or they're dead for the session. Of course, the next state budget forecast comes out next week, and then we'll likely see House and Senate budgets after that. We'll know more after that. Senate Bill 5174, which was the wood stove bill to tighten and bring state wood stove standards in line with the federal requirements on new wood stoves, is dead for the session. Would have added some additional clarity, but that's okay. It's dead.
Other thing I'll mention is that Senate Bill 5360, this is the Attorney General's Office request legislation concerning environmental crimes. That is moving. It's moved out of the Senate and is now being considered by the House. As I mentioned last month, this legislation brings Washington in line with federal provisions and as well as provisions in many other states that criminalizing negligence and knowing violations of environmental law. Again, I don't see a direct impact to ORCAA as much perhaps as your prosecuting offices and other things. And I don't know, Jeff, did you?
This bill also continues the as a gross misdemeanor, the knowing failure to disclose a potential conflict of interest by a board member. That's existing law. If you have a potential conflict of interest and a matter comes before the board, you have to disclose it. If you knowingly fail to do so, it's a gross misdemeanor. What this bill does is it increases the penalty for that. It still is a year, up to a year in jail, but it could be up to a $10,000 rather than a $5,000 fine. So it just really kind of spotlights the issue of making sure that we disclose any potential conflict of interest on a matter that comes before the board.
Okay, well, thanks, Jeff. Okay, so that's all I had. I can pass it off to Jennifer for compliance manager update unless there are any questions for me. Not seeing any. So Jennifer, take it away.
Standing in for Mike today was had a source test unexpectedly, so he had a few things he wanted me to pass on to you. So from the compliance team, so on the inspection side, Christian Herr, who's our newly hired inspector, got his HERA building inspector certification, and he's going to be doing his HAZWA for certification in 2 weeks. He's on his way. Finishing up his trainings. We do have a good pool of candidates for the last open inspector position, so we'll be conducting inspections probably around the first week of April. Sorry, conducting interviews. For the engineering team, it is emission inventory time, and inventories have been coming in. We have gotten 73 out of the 78. There's still 5 that are outstanding and overdue. And I know Debbie is working on writing those as a violation to those that came in late. And we have also finished our work on Ecology's AOP performance audit with as part of their committee. They will be publishing the final report soon. The results looked good from what I've seen, so we'll share it with you when it's available. And Mike did want to point out that looked at the packet provided with the board meeting, that there was in the NOV section, there were 2 NOVs issued to a Schultz. He just wanted to assure you that they are no relation to him. But I'm happy to answer any questions on any of that information or information in the board packet.
Questions for Jennifer? My only question is for the owl. I don't even know what it's paying attention to. I have to say, it's like flicking back and forth. You guys, it's got a little ADHD, but thank you, Jennifer.
Maybe too much caffeine this morning.
Yeah. Okay. If there's no other questions, I guess we'll turn it back to Odell.
All right. Dan, do you have, yeah, there it is. Next slide. So this is our February air monitoring summary. You will notice that Chesapeake was gray for most of the month. It snowed a lot at the end of January, the beginning of February, and that caused the road up to Chesapeake to get a lot of snow and not be passable by any vehicles. They don't plow that road. We also lost power up there, and then the data logger didn't come back online, and so we didn't have any data and we didn't have any way to fix it. So that happened, and the snow lasted for quite a bit longer up there than it did down here. You'll notice Forks and Port Angeles had a few moderate days up there. That was related to the cold weather and an increase in wood stove use and decreased wind. So go Clallam County. I guess we need some more wood stove changeouts or something up there in Clallam County. Otherwise, we had pretty good air quality at most of our other sites. Dark greens across the board in Raymond and mostly in Aberdeen as well. And all green in Shelton and 1 moderate day in Lacey. So all in all, pretty good. So next slide. So here we go, Cheek. On February 27th, Rob and I were on our way up to the site when Rob asked me, hey, did you notice the site's not communicating? And I said, well, I was on it yesterday and it was fine. Well, that power cable that we were worried about all year finally failed, February 26th. So Cheek is without power for the foreseeable future. We had a great meeting with the ORCAA tribe yesterday. We are working on solutions to move the site. We have a secondary site set up that has very similar characteristics to Cheek. We need to get EPA to approve that move. We need to get the ORCAA Tribal Council to approve that move. But so far it looks very promising. And if their options are no site or a moved site, I'm hoping that they'll go with a moved site. So that is the Cheek situation, and we will probably be down for a few months at least while we work on that. The Grace Harbor Saturation Study Report, I'm continuing to work on that, and I'm hoping to have that completed before we do the focus on Grace Harbor, so that we can have both of those things sort of happen simultaneously, because that would be a good fit. And I think that's in June.
It hasn't been scheduled yet. I was just making myself a note to.
Okay, so when we,
yeah.
so yeah, if you want to make that July, that would be fine too.
My sense is, because we've already have something else in June, and of course we'll have a budget hearing in June, so my sense is probably pushing it out to July.
Okay, so that makes it more feasible that I will get that done.
If that works for you, Georgia, I can be in touch and we can talk about kind of what works best for you on that.
That works just fine. Thank you.
Okay. We've also, Rob has been out and about while he does his inspections and was able to get the Aberdeen and the Raymond site fixed. We had some problems at Raymond with communication, and Mike Schultz went out there and tried to fix it. It turned out it was not us, it was the cell tower, somebody. I'm not sure. Grace Harbor is not Grace, Raymond.
That's Pacific County.
Is he here? He's not here. Oh, I think someone hit the cell tower. Anyway, there was a problem. The cell tower was offline. So we spent some time trying to fix it and it wasn't a problem. And then, yeah, we did our monthly dam and etholometer QC at Lacey. And we had our second ecology training at Lacey for the etholometer. So did some more outreach with other agencies in February. And that's kind of it. My two main things are Grace Harbor and resolving the Cheek thing, which is now big. Yeah.
Any questions? Comments for Odell? All right. Quiet bunch today. We'll pass it on to Dan for the communications update.
So I don't have a whole lot. On March 1st, I came up, actually on Friday the 28th, came up to Port Townsend, set up, staffed a booth at the Jefferson County Home Show on the 1st. That was a great show at the Blue Heron Middle School. I think it's the best attended one of those I've seen in Jefferson County in the I think 6 or 7 times I've done it. The weather was great, which makes a difference. In the past, we've had snow or rain or 30-mile-an-hour winds, and it just didn't make people want to leave their houses, I think. So, but really great attendance, really great conversations, a lot of discussions about wood stoves and asbestos, especially. The next day I left for Hawaii and just got back late last night. So I don't have a lot to report on that. Glad we don't have VOG to deal with. There's some volcanic activity, so I dealt with a little bit of sulfur oxides, but not a whole lot. I will note we do have home shows for the next couple months. April 12th is the Olympia home show that staff will be attending and running a booth at, and then in Grace Harbor on May 17th. And have been running radio spots in Clallam, Jefferson County on the Port Angeles radio stations, getting really good response. I think I've got 4 or 5 wood stove replacements done. from those and another dozen queries from people up in Port Angeles to Port Townsend have heard it and responded. So getting good response on those. I will note that program is down. I've did a bunch of pre-approvals just this morning before the board meeting. And I'm down to about $9,000 left of available funds that's not allocated to pre-approve. So that's essentially 4 heat pumps and a natural gas stove going out. So I anticipate running out of funds by mid-April at the latest, and we'll keep you posted on that. But it looks, talking to Jeff this morning, it looks like we should have that grant funded at existing or similar levels for the next biennium. So we'll be relaunching that later in the summer. And again, because I've missed a lot of time here in the office, I apologize. I did not get you a printed board report, so you did not get your news you can use social media tags this morning. But we'll get that going again and keep that a regular basis. So questions?
I'm sorry, Dan, were you saying that the Port Townsend Home Show was the best of all the counties or the best of it compared to other years?
That was the best attended for Port Townsend for Jefferson
that's good
County.
to hear.
And
That's good to hear.
that's a good thing. I mean, it's a smaller show. It's a one-day event in the middle school gymnasium. So it's not a big show, but it was really well attended. I think I had better discussions there than I have at the Clallam County Home Show, because that tends to be more of a crafts show. There's not a lot of builders there. So
And did you say that there's a show May 17th in Grays Harbor?
the Grays Harbor Home and Garden Show, I believe it is.
Okay, at the fairground.
Master Gardeners are doing it
Yep, okay, thank you.
in Elma, I believe.
Yep, the fairgrounds.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dan. Now, I guess for his first report, can you turn the spotlight onto Tyson for his first financial report? That's good. Owl is already prefiguring you, so that's perfect. Take it away.
Scary. Yeah, so nice to meet you all. This is my first board report. A little update on the budget. We're making good progress on the fiscal year 2026 budget. The board and finance committee can expect to receive a draft budget package on April 4th. Some updates on the operational side of finance. So Lynn and I have been going over the financial management of the agency since February. We've covered revenue, expenditures, payroll, and now budgeting. During the succeeding months that are coming, Lynn and I are planning to go over building operations, which we really haven't touched on very much. And then re-reviewing primary position functions and any sort of unique issues I might run into in my position here. And really my top priority during the remainder of this fiscal year is just to maintain continuity for the agency when it comes to financial functions. And then Jeff wanted me to also note that we have been having issues with our federal drawdown application. We haven't been able to access it since early February. Lynn and I are periodically checking to see if it's accessible. So we're just making note of when it's not available. Currently, we have about $4,300 of reimbursable expenditures that need to be drawn down through that system. So not a huge impact as of yet, but it's kind of an ongoing technical issue that we've been dealing with lately. Some information, some updates on the building operations and maintenance side. So we are still looking for a part-time maintenance technician. Again, this is a great opportunity for someone with maintenance experience that might be trying to supplement some sort of another source of income. We have the position posted on our website, so feel free to go check it out, or if you know someone who may be interested, refer them to our website, or you can have them contact me if you have any questions. We also continue to have one vacancy. We were talking to a commercial real estate broker. She relayed that the commercial real estate space is quite saturated at the moment. And as such, we reduced our rent down to $13.95 from $1,500 in the hopes of attracting a renter. So hopefully we'll get that rented. Again, I think that posting is now available on our website as well. It's also should show up on Craigslist, so. ORCAA Wellness, I'm happy to report that we did receive the 2% discount on our premiums. That's a real team effort throughout ORCAA to get that discount. Wanted to give a special thanks to our wellness committee, and that is Aaron Manley, Aiden Palm, Chris Kraus, and Lynn Hardy. And that's gonna be it for me, so.
Thank you so much, Tyson. It's nice to meet you. I look forward to meeting you in person. Any questions, comments today? My only question is, do you inherit the wellness committee too as the finance in the finance role? Is that linked at the hip here?
Yeah, so I'll be involved with the wellness committee there. It's something completely brand new to me, so I'm eager to get involved with that, so.
Duties as assigned. That's great. Well, it's great to get the 2% discount on the insurance premiums.
And I think that's our 12th year. I was looking at the plaque over there and I was counting the little years, so it's our 12th year receiving that 2% discount, so I can't let that fall to the wayside now.
Sounds good. That's great. One last call. Any questions? Okay. Well, thank you, Tyson. And we're speeding through this. Don't tell Jim that we were done in an hour, but we are just about there. So anything for the good of the order today?
Greg, I'll just mention that so before, about a week ago, maybe 10 days ago now, Debbie sent out an email about today's meeting, and then following the meeting, Jennifer and Abby Roberts will be doing a demo that they'll be doing at the Expanding Your Horizons, which is a STEAM conference for middle school girls, trans, non-binary youth to advance education, equity, and increase representation in STEAM fields. So that's something that they're doing later this month. So right after this meeting, they're going to do the demo here in the room for anybody that's here, or if folks want to stay on, we'll end the meeting. But if folks want to stay on Zoom, that's an option as well. And I just also wanted to mention that I know at the last meeting, Jim talked about having an executive session at the meeting today to talk about my executive director review. Since Jim wasn't here, he wanted to push that out, but so we'll be doing that in April. So Jim recently shared, I know many of you completed completed a survey. And so I got those results about a week ago. So I'm going through those results that I got from many board members, from staff, from the management team here, looking at those. And I will be at our April board meeting and during executive session, we can talk about those. So.
Sounds good. Thanks for that, Jeff. Okay, anything else for the good of the order? All right, well, easy peasy. A reminder, you can stick around if you'd like to see the presentation demo after this, but we will release you from your official ORCAA duties and we are adjourned. So everyone have a great week.